Assalamualaikum and a very good morning. I am Sophie Nashara and I will begin our presentation for today. So, this is our presentation for our mini research projects, and in this group we have Iman binti Nur Azam, Syed Abdul Majid, and me myself, Sophie Nashara binti Mama Hatta. So, let's get started. Our presentation is about a study on Malaysian higher education students over generalization on the use of present tense on past events. So, throughout our presentation, we will hear the word overgeneralization, present tense, past events, and meaning-making sentences. In this presentation, there are several aspects we will be talking about. So firstly, I will talk about the objectives of the research and the chapters or theories referred to human learning. The main subtopic will be overgeneralization and interlanguage, which focuses on strategies of communication and fossilization. Okay, so for the next presenter, Syed Abdul Majid will be talking about the key parameters considered. And then Iman will talk about our findings and discussion, and also the finding comparison. Finally, the reflection will be talked in the end of the presentation by Syed Abdul Majid again. Alright, firstly, we will be talking about the objectives of the research. What are the research objectives? Well, the objectives of this research are, firstly, to investigate students in overgeneralization of the use of present tense forms in their sentences. Second, to appraise the effects of delivering the meaning-making sentences, semantics of the students from overgeneralization and the use of present tense form. So, after we decided on the research objectives, we need to ask questions, right? So, we came up with the research questions of this study, which are, firstly, how do students overgeneralizing the use of present tense forms in their sentences? Second, what are the effects in delivering the meaning-making sentences, semantics of the students from overgeneralization, the use of present tense form? To answer these questions, we need to do research, and those research needs to be backed up by those theories, right? Yes, so during our SLA classes, Second Language Acquisition, we can conclude that Chapter 4 and Chapter 9 were most suitable chapters to support our research. So I will be defining and explaining Chapter 4, Human Learning, subtopic Generalization, and Chapter 9, Interlanguage, subtopic Strategies of Communication and Fossilization. There are many theories about the human learning and second language acquisition. Items are subsumed and generalized under high-order categories for meaningful retention. Overgeneralization is a phenomenon in which language learners, first, second, or additional, apply a rule or pattern in a situation where it does not apply in the target language, resulting in non-conventional forms. In second language acquisition, overgeneralization as process that occurs as second language learners acts within the target language. For example, some students say fighted instead of fought, overgeneralizing the morphological rule that is making past tense. Next is Chapter 9, which is Interlanguage, subtopic Strategies of Communication and Fossilization. We're going to talk about strategies of communication first, okay? So strategies of communication may include paraphrasing, substitution, coining new words, switching from first language to second language, and asking for clarification. These strategies, with the exception of switching languages, are also used by native speakers. Next, interlanguage fossilization is when people learning a second language keep talking rules from their native language and incorrectly applying them to second language as they are learning. So this is in this result in a language system that is different from both the person's native language and their second language. To sum up, interlanguage is a linguistic system created by second language learners to assist their second language acquisition. Rules are created by individual learners, so they are unique for every learner. Alright, so we've covered the research objectives, research questions, and all the chapters and theories supporting our findings. Now we move on to our next presenter, Said Abdul Majid, to talk about the key parameters considered.
So now I will be explaining on the key parameters considered. There are two of them. The first one is language competency and the second one is meaning making sentences delivery. So language competency, this parameter is about how well students can deliver the intended meaning despite the inaccuracy of the tenses that they use. And the second one is meaning making sentences delivery. This parameter, on the other hand, is about how the usage of present tense in describing things that happened in the past affect the meaning making sentences.
Assalamualaikum and greetings everyone. My name is Iman binti Narza and today I'll be presenting the findings and discussion that we have acquired through our research project that we have conducted. Now there are two major findings that we have discovered. Firstly is the grammar error that participants produced throughout the interview session. Secondly is the verb error. So what are these two? When we talk about grammar error, we realize that our participants has the tendency to use simple present tense to talk about past events. And secondly, in terms of verb error, we realize also that throughout the interview session, the verbs that the participants use tend to lack or are in need of past participle form. Now, when we look at Table 1, grammar error frequency and percentage of 3 non-TESOL UiTM students, we can see that the grammar error produced by these 3 participants is in the use of present tense in place of simple past tense. The minimum frequency of participants producing it is at least at 5 and at the most at 16, which comes to an average percentage of 11%. Now moving on to Table 2, which is verb issue frequency and percentage of 3 non-TESOL UiTM students. Now, the verb issue or verb error here that we can see is the deficit of past participle form. Now, again, the least amount of frequency is 3 at a minimum, and the most is at 8, which comes to the average percentage of students producing this or incorrect verb error at the percentage of 11.67%. Moving on to section B, the description of errors. Now there are two major errors that we have identified. Firstly is the use of simple present tense in place of simple past tense. Now this research was conducted under the expectations that participants were able to use past tense correctly, meaning that they were able to use past participle forms of regular verbs and irregular verbs. Nonetheless, that was very difficult to see throughout the 3 participants that we have interviewed because they were overgeneralizing the use of present tense to describe past events. How? So there are 3 major samples that we have picked up from each participant. Firstly, it's quite hard. The correct form would be it was quite hard. Secondly, I can do better than before, and the word should be replaced with the word it could have. I could done that better before. I could do better than before. And last but not least is so his name is Khairul Afiq, and when referring to this in the past tense would be so his name was Khairul Afiq. Secondly is how the participant produced verbs that were deficit in past participle forms. Now there were 2 major deficits which are omission of suffixes of ed or ed in regular verbs and also the omission of past participle form for irregular verbs. How? So when we talk about omission of the suffixes d or ed for the past participle form of regular verbs, it can be seen in 2 samples. Firstly, I consider him as close friend. It should be rectified as I considered him as a close friend with an ed. And secondly, will be already achieved for one I. This should be added with the word achieve should be added ed because she is talking in the past tense. So the correct answer would be, or the correct sentence would be already achieved for when I. And last but not least is the omission of past participle form for irregular verbs. can be seen in the sentences or in the analysis that discourse analysis produced by the last participant. I feel like I choose the wrong person to be my friend, and the word feel should be replaced with the word felt. So the correct sentence would be, I felt like I choose the wrong person to be my friend. And although this sentence structure sounds correct, there is syntax error to it, and this is also because this participant was overgeneralizing the use of present tense to form her sentences. Moving on to the last section, which is section C, the discussion or answers to our research questions. Let us recall back what are the research questions that we have identified here. Firstly, how do students overgeneralize the use of present tense forms in their sentences? They do so by omitting the suffixes of D and ED for regular verbs and lacking the presence of past participle forms of irregular verbs. In the words of Ong and Mahadi 2022, Malaysian students struggle to understand the verb tenses, and the logic is simple here. Why? It is because they are adhering too much to the first language grammar system, whereby there are no tenses to describe past events. In the words of Ismail 2022, she says so that this happens because L1 learners or L2 learners, in fact, are adhering to the Bahasa Malaysia expression of tenses, whereby they use adverbs of time, which can be seen in the example here. I also get many of new knowledge. Instead of using acquired many of new knowledge, the participants used get. And this is because the participant is adhering to the first language grammar system instead of the second language grammar system. Here we can see that the overgeneralization using the first language grammar system has led to the first language interference in an understanding the second language grammar system for second language learners. This is what we call as negative overgeneralization. Secondly, the second research questions that we would like to answer is, what are the effects in delivering the meaning-making sentences, semantics, of the students from overgeneralizing the use of present tense forms? Now, the participants realize more on the pragmatic cues that their sentences provided. It is because they believe that by providing vivid depiction of the events occurred, listeners and their audience would be able to understand their intended meaning. Nevertheless, intended meaning of participant sentences can be delivered at both extremes. One, it can be comprehensible from the context given, and secondly, it can be incomprehensible regardless of the context provided. This shows that there is negative fossilization as a total of 22.67%, which is a total of grammar error of 11% and verbs error of 11.67%, where these two grammatical errors can negatively affect semantic meaning of students when they are speaking to an audience. Moving on to the next subsection would be findings comparison. Now, from findings comparison, the aspect that we have discovered was overgeneralization of present tense is apparent, and this can be seen and be compared to two papers. From a local paper, 27 salient spoken English grammar errors identified in Malaysian public university students, a remedial guide by Ong and Mahadi 2022. Secondly, international papers, the impact of the absence of grammatical tense in L1 on the acquisition of the tense aspect system in second language, which is by Yuan and Hong 2004, and last but not least is the simple present tense used as historical present in English by Higuchi 1998. Now let's see how our findings that I have presented earlier can be compared to the findings of the three papers that I have presented locally and internationally. Now, firstly, the use of simple present tense instead of simple past tense to describe past events is reflective of the study by Ong and Mahadi. So, these two researchers emphasize that Malaysian students in higher institutions faces problem to utilize the English language tense system. Why? Because as we have discussed earlier, there is omission of past participle forms for regular verbs and irregular verbs, and also the overgeneralization of using present tense to talk about past events has led us to the conclusion that regardless of the actions or memories that transpire in the past, it does not require Malaysian students in higher institutions to express them using past tense. Thus, their sentence structure or syntax structure and semantics of their sentences may seem inaccurate at times because the intended meaning or semantics of the sentences is heavily dependent on the pragmatic use as noted by Yong and Huang 2004. Now, why is it like so? According to Higuchi 1998, she calls this the explaining mode. How does it work? This is when second language learners attempt to recall their previous events or schema or memories when they are required to provide responses or information at that moment or in the exact moment when they are required to do so, which leads them to use simple present tense. Thus, it makes sense that overgeneralization of present tense is appearing not only in the Malaysian local context, but also is also appearing in the international local context.
To reflect our research, the overgeneralization of present tense forms happens when students try to describe things that happened in the past. This is because the majority of the inaccurate use of past tense was spoken in simple present tense. To be more specific, it happens through substitution, and it happens both to auxiliaries and main verbs. For example, candidate 1 said that 2021 is such a bad year for me. She substituted was with is. And then, the overgeneralization of the usage of present tense by the students both affect and not affect the delivery of meaning-making sentences. To be more specific, it affects because the sentences because they can be interpreted in a way that it happens in the present. The sentences become contextually ambiguous. The information given in the text in terms of when it happened did not suffice. For example, candidate 3 said that I can show them what I already achieved for when I studied diploma. So without knowing the previous context or even the questions that led to this answer, listeners would perceive that what the speaker said or candidate 3 said happens in the present. And it does not affect the delivery of the meaning-making sentences because in some cases during the interviews they will follow their sentence with information that indicates that the event happened in the past. For example, candidate 1 said that last year I had these goals. She used the word have instead of had, which shows that it should be happening in the present. However, the meaning was still conveyed because she mentioned specifically that it happened last year.